Okay, everyone, do not panic. I want to talk about which witch I am. Because, actually, there is no because. I was recently, I don't know, I had gone down a rabbit hole of what eclecticism really is and how it's used in so many ways as a crutch to like pull from blah, 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 blah. Right? And then that led me, because most videos and stuff on YouTube, especially that you would watch and the information that you would come across about eclecticism was eclecticism versus traditional witchcraft. And then I know Teia Kennedy made a video a while back that said, like, you're probably really a traditional witch and you just don't know it. I'll leave that below, which was pretty hilarious because Teia is. But anyway, so I had gotten into this, I had gone down this rabbit hole, and then I thought, holy shit, which witch am I? The funny thing is that I could say something like, who cares? Why should you care? Why is it important? Well, they're all good questions, okay? But here's some other good questions. How would you know if you were diving into something that you weren't actually supposed to? How could your magic have power if you don't understand it or understand where it comes from? Another good point. So I had to ask myself these, and I wrote them down, and then I thought, you know what? My journal page for this looked like this. Okay. It started out as eclecticism, and then I was like, which witch am I? What does eclecticism mean? Does it mean that you're lazy and don't want to learn anything? How can your magic have power if you don't understand it? Or if you don't understand where it comes from? Or if you don't understand the cosmology behind it? All valid points. How are you sure you're not taking and stealing from something that you're not supposed to? Could you ever really understand the cultures that you're not a part of that you want to utilize? It's okay, like, especially if like you are drawn to something and maybe it's considered closed, unless you're like rebranding that closed culture to form like a new world order witchcraft based on that, then that's not where you need to go with it. But if you're someone that's solitary or in a small group and wants to utilize certain things from a closed practice, but you know and you revere that practice and you're not trying to sell anything through that, then I think that that's okay. But anyway, knowing those things is where it's when and where it's important, right? And then I started thinking, how do you define it? How do you structure it? How do you hold its value? What are the ethics and moralizations? And then I wrote down, let me just whiteboard this out. What are my labels? And then see if I can figure out where they all come from and figure out which witch am I. So all the words that I had written down for my labels were solitary, pagan, animistic, folk, witch. Okay. First, right off the rip, solitary. That's self-explanatory. It just means that I'm not part of a group or a coven or a community that gets together regularly to perform magical workings. I do them all by myself. The next one is pagan. Now, that's a huge umbrella term. Definitionally speaking, paganism is like, now it can be construed as a nature-based practice or religion. But back in the day, it just meant that you weren't part of a faith or a religion that is of the world, right? You're like, you were something else. You were just something else. And I was actually called, growing up, I was actually called a heathen. Because back in that day, the colloquialism of my area was heathen was someone that was very pagan minded, was very spiritualist, but not very religious. And every time I would do something or ask something or say something that would seem very witchy and pagan, my grandmother figure at the time would always call me a heathen or a heifer, which is a cow. But it was like an endearment that was like, oh, you're so witchy, you know? I don't know. Like, you're so hard to handle, right? So those were the nicknames that I had. But pagan, for me, is not necessarily a religion. It's more of my worldview. It's nature-based reverence. Not necessarily a religion, but more a practice of nature. Anyway, the next one is animistic, okay? As an animist, I think about souls, and it's a worldview, so it's not a religion, but it's more of a practice that involves the worldview about souls and spirits and everything having a spirit and everything having a soul. And it's different to me than pantheism because it goes on the uniqueness of those souls too, but how they're interlocked and interwoven on the web of life. So as an animist, that makes the most sense to me as being out. I incorporate that into my spiritualism and into my witchcraft practice. But it's technically a worldview. Now, I've written some arrows. I've got a lot of arrows in my notebook that points to animism from spirit communication and spirit flight, but that's something else, okay? And then that I wrote traditional and then put animistic as well. Now, that segues into the next one is folk. Okay. When thinking about, okay, if this was a spectrum between folk and traditional witchcraft or whatever practices, I would say I'd gear more towards the folk. But there are some elements of my witchcraft that can be construed as traditional witchcraft. So I tried to break it down. The two main reasons that I'm more on the side of the folk is self-initiation and intuition, an intuitive, I'll say, an intuitive practice. Self-initiation is, again, because of my solitary practice, but also I don't need to be initiated into anything. Right? So it's more self-initiation based and it's more intuitive based. A lot of the spells and rituals and rites that I would do in my solitary practice come from myself. I make them up. I don't get them from anywhere, and they aren't compiled from a lot of the practices that traditional witchcrafts would have. Some of the things that off the top of my head, using a formal altar space, don't have one of those. Using the compass, I don't utilize that. I have my own type of wheel of the year. I kind of like figure out, like, it's very sacred which ones I venerate. Let's see. The Besom store staff and stang, I don't utilize any of those. So some of the things in traditional witchcraft, they don't resonate with me. So I'm all of that pushes me into a little bit more of a folk practice than a traditional practice. Another one is that folks are about the folk, right? And for me, living in Appalachia, okay, I utilize a lot of bioregionalism, genus loci, spirits of place, the plants and the plant spirits that are here, some granny magic. Like a lot of my granny magic was passed down to me. Some superstitions, like putting an axe in to cut the pain, slapping some butter on a chigger bite, using tobacco to cure a bee sting. Some of that came from my actual parents and grandparents. So that would be considered like stuff my mamaw taught me, So I utilize a lot of that. Now, the two types of folks, I guess, if we were thinking about folks, are the Appalachia and Scottish, maybe even like Celtic folks, like Scottish folk practices, having some of my ancestry there, and I resonate with so many of their folk practices that I utilize some of them in my practice. So those are the folks, and then other things that could be mixed, like they were sitting right here in the middle of the spectrum, is otherworldly, having an otherworldly practice. That does mean that, now I don't like the labels of medium or psychic or something like that, but I do have visions, and I do have what I would consider an otherworldly practice where I venture, I journey, I do journey work, do astral work, and stuff like that. So, sorry if you can see the cars going by. But anyway, so there's that. Spirit communication and spirit flight, divination, and folklore. Okay. Now, folklore is a traditional thing, using forms of folklore. Now, then I started thinking, okay, what are the folklores that I do and would utilize in my own practice? And that would be witch myths, such as Circe, Medea, stuff from the PGM, and things that I've found in working with Baba Yaga. Working with the babushka has been an integral part of my practice in terms of this like archetypal deity work that I do in an abstract way. So some of the Slavic and I would say they're ancient magic. They're myths. So the myths of Baba Yaga, magic myths such as spiritualism and shamanism, and priestess myths and tales. So the tales of priestess and priestesshood, like the Vestal Virgins and the Eleusinian Mysteries and things like that. So those are the folks and the whatever like that I would consider folk and traditional part of my practice. Mostly, when I look at folklore, I don't typically siphon any of that from folklore like people do with the witch hunts. I don't do that. It's more so I look at them and try to like siphon out the signs and the symbols from those and then use that and come up with my own stuff, which gears back to my solitary practice. And then witch. Now, all those labels, right? Solitary, pagan, animistic, folk. I could say practitioner, right? What makes it a witch at the end of that? What makes me a witch at the end of all my labels? And I got to thinking, okay, well, that's the use of magic, sorcery, because I believe that there are two different things. So magic, sorcery, and enchantment. And all of that means that I utilize the models of magic, the psychological, spiritual, energetic, stuff like that, the models of magic. I utilize actual magic, so spells, rites, and rituals that I come up with myself. Sorcery, which is an outward projection of the magic in whichever way that I deem necessary. And enchantments, which can be like charming things, illusory work, illusions on myself, glamour magic, amulets, talismans, stuff like that, right? And sympathetic magic, I believe, goes into enchantment as well, instead of magic, but whatever. And I see all of the techniques that I utilize within those things under witch differently than a traditional witch would. So it's like how I define witchcraft and being a witch. Is it a craft? Is it an art? I'm actually going to make a video about that. Is it a craft or is it an art? And I actually made a video already about how I identify as a witch. So my craft stems from my identity, and how they may overlap, but they may not always. Just the fact that I identify as one is enough for me sometimes. So I'll leave that video below for you to go check out. Let's see, what else did I write down? The last one was, what label would you put if you worked with deity, right? Or is it not one? Because witches don't have to have deities. Solitary practitioners don't have to have deities. You don't even know if you have a theistic, like what I said about being an animist. Sometimes it's kind of hard to say you're an animist, but then also have a deity practice, because you're not, the deity work is a theist. It's mostly, definitionally speaking, deity work is a theistic practice in some kind of way. You know, polytheistic, pantheistic, panentheistic, dualistic, monotheistic, whatever. It's a theist practice. But if you're an animist, then that means everything could potentially be your deity. So it's kind of wonky and it can get kind of weird. But I would probably say I would add myself into the soft polytheism label, because of how my deity practice looks at the moment. Because I don't have like, but see, it's wonky because I have to get in touch with my beliefs on, because theism is like God, right? So what do I think of God? Do I think of God as this all creator? Do I think that he made us and then became us in this animistic kind of a way where like if he created us, then he became all of us too, and all of his little stars when he exploded became us and everything in the natural world. So it may not even be a theistic practice. It could be the fact that like I work with deity in this like abstract, loose way. It could be because my deity work stems for like a lot of mirror work, self-reflection work. Instead of this, you are a deity that is over me and telling me what to do and who to be and all that under your name, like in Jesus's name, you know, in Hecate's name. It's not really like that. So I don't know, it's kind of weird. So to have soft polytheism or a theist at the end of that just doesn't always make sense to me. And then it's like, are any of these labels enough? So if a witch were to come up to me, say at a convention or something, and be like, oh, you know, what kind of witch are you? Are you a witch? You know, what kind of practitioner are you? Whatever the question they would ask. And I would say, I'm a solitary pagan animistic folk witch. And then I have to think, what questions could they potentially pose to me after I said that? Oh, well, you don't have anyone that you practice magic with? No. Are you interested in that? Here's my card, right? Something like that. Okay, sure. You put it in your pocket and okay. You're a pagan, right? So many magical practitioners, occult practitioners, witches, whatever, don't have to be pagan. So, oh, you revere nature. Yes. Nature is important. I utilize a lot of nature. But the nature thing that I do could go into my folk, not necessarily pagan, right? So for me, they would say, oh, you venerate the wheel of the year. Well, yeah, but I kind of do what I want. Oh, you know, you say that you are a folk, so that means you use certain natural elements. Do you use the elements? Do you use herbs? Do you use flowers and plant matter and stuff like that? You know, you would say yes, but that's going into the folk, not the pagan. So what does pagan really mean? And then they say, oh, you're an animist. So how does that work? Do you have any deities? And then you say, actually, yeah, I do. I work with it in an abstract way. Then you go into your deity spiel. And then they hopefully they understand, right? And it's hard. It's hard to say which witch you are. It can be hard to have a conversation, especially with people that don't get it, or that are confused about certain labels. So I don't know. I just thought I would share some of these thoughts with you guys. Leave your thoughts below. I hope everyone's having a magical day. Much love.